Okay. Calling to order the committee of the whole meeting for Diamond Lake School District 76. Roll call, please.
Ms. Angarola, here. Ms. Bailiff, here. Mr. Becker, here. Ms. Hale,
Here.
Mr. Houtman,
Here.
Mr. Candela,
Here.
Sullivan.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we now open the floor for public comments on agenda items. If we have any public comments, you can feel free to comment, or if you're joining us virtually, you can feel free to type those into the chat box and we will read those into the meeting for you. We will pause to allow everyone an opportunity to do that if they wish. And I do not see any public comments, so we will move on to presentations.
All right, we have two presentations this evening. Our first one is to recognize one of our amazing staff members, Deanna Fisher, who was nominated for a Diamond Award by Mr. Eric Rogers. So I'm going to hand the floor to Mr. Rogers.
Okay, I talk at every single meeting, I think, but I've never actually talked to the podium, so the pressure is getting to me already. But yeah, I don't take recommendations like this lightly. I don't like to really, not really my thing. I don't think I have too many opportunities to recognize people for Diamond Awards. But you know, this really means a lot to me to recommend Deanna Fisher. It means a lot to John's here as well. But Deanna is one of my most favorite people I've ever worked with before. She started with us in 2019, and the most amazing thing about Deanna is she never did payroll before she came here. You know, it's always hard hiring a business office person. And it's like, oh, she's got a little experience in a bunch of different stuff. And when I interviewed her, it was like love at first sight getting you in here. I had to have it. But you know, being in a business office, it's a thankless position. You're just expected that everything's going to go well, and when it doesn't, you're the only one that everyone likes to blame. And they don't really realize what goes on behind the scenes. So the long hours it's involved, the meticulous work, but that's where Deanna really thrives. And you know, we all went through a really scary transition over the summer when we lost Peggy, who was doing accounts payable for 15 years or 16 years or whatever the case might be. But you know, we both had the panic look in our eye, and I just remember you looking at me and you're like, I got this. Don't worry about this. We're hiring somebody who's never done anything business related in her entire life. And you're like, you know, I got this. And so just going through, Deanna spent so many hours training Belinda to really be, you know, after only 3 or 4 months here, like really becoming an expert in her craft. And it's been amazing to see every time I walk by Belinda's office is Deanna sitting right next to her. So it's been truly an honor working with you. There's no one I've worked with, and I think I will work with, that I'd love to go in the foxhole with and just work side by side. So I'm like so proud to work with you. You make my life easier. The greatest thing I could ever say about you is like, you make me better at my job and you make my life easier. So I truly appreciate you, Dee. Truly appreciate working with you. So if anyone that's ever been nominated for this award deserves it, it's you. So thank you and congratulations.
I've never seen him talk like that before.
Would you like to say anything?
You don't have to. No, you don't have, if you don't want to, you don't have to.
I just wanted to say it's much easier when you have a great mentor. Thank you so much for this. It means the world.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Deanna, and thank you, John. Very well deserved I echo everything that Eric says. You're just absolutely amazing. And you haven't skipped a beat with all the challenges that we have thrown at you through the pandemic and then through the transition of a new employee. You've just been absolutely wonderful and truly have sparkled like a diamond. So thank you. And on that note, we have our second presentation, which is just as exciting as the Diamond Award. It is our fall assessment update. I know Mr. Hansen's going to take a quick picture and then you guys are welcome to stay or leave, but thank you. I know you got
Thank you
dogs
very
to get
much.
home too. So this is a joint presentation that will be shared by our principals as well as Dr. Cunningham. So I am going to turn the floor over to Dr. Cunningham, who will do a brief introduction, and then we'll have each principal share their school's results and then kind of close out with a district summary. Dr. Cunningham.
All right, thank you so much. Before we go into our STAR data, which is our test that we give 3 times a year to benchmark our students, we just want to take a brief moment to talk about the school report card that came out, the new interactive school report card for 21-22 school year. Illinois really revamped a lot of how they present the information and how they report out for schools. And so the 4 levels of designation do remain. And we are all 3 of our schools in our district were labeled for commendable in 21-22. So we're very proud of that designation, and it says a lot about how we've gone through the pandemic. Just to explain on that next slide of exactly what the breakdown is. This is from the state and how they score each school. So I'm just going to take a moment to explain this. Essentially, between English language arts and math language and math proficiency, or excuse me, growth, that is 50% of your score, is to see how you grew from year to year. And really from this case, it'd be from the 2021 year to the 21-22. And then another 15% of your score is your proficiency, which is levels 4 or 5 in math and ELA. So it's the number of kids that scored a 4 or a 5, that's the proficient side. The science proficiency is the Illinois Science Assessment. It's given in 5th grade and 8th grade each year. And this year it was just a participation score because for a number of reasons, they did not want to make that an actual metric. And also they needed some longevity data to be able to see what might be an appropriate score for proficiency. And then the English learner progress to proficiency is 5%. And that's showing so the state has created what they want to see in percentage increases for EL students every year. And it's that progress that you're making toward that proficiency every year will be 5% of your score. Otherwise, the other 2 pieces, and by the way, I forgot to mention IR is giving grades 3 through 8. So these other 2 weights carry a lot for DLS. Chronic absenteeism is 20% of your score. That means you've missed 18 days of school during the last 180 days of school. And then the climate survey, that's the 5 essentials survey, which you can find in our report card. It's not the score you get, it's your participation rate of your students taking that. It's 5% of your score. The other 3 will go into effect in 2025. Pre-K through 2, that has to do with the number of kids that are in acceleration, enrichment offerings, and the teacher certifications that are in primary, and then grades 3 through 8, very similar. And just want to make sure it is a combination of mathematic proficiency, middle school success, and participation in enrichment and acceleration. There's an emphasis from the state right now in seeing the numbers of students in accelerated classes and honors increase, particularly those that are minority students, racial and culturally. And then the last measure is fine arts, which is the teacher certification and student participation in fine arts programs. I believe it's grades 3 through 8. Just want to make sure. Yeah, it's grades. Actually, it doesn't matter. It's K through 12. So those are the measures of the 25% and how we come to our score each year. There's been a lot of really good information you can explore on the website. I only mention this because Joy Hale mentioned that the board would love to know this kind of information. So I will share that. For example, you can find out a lot about where our district is as a point in time. The test itself, the IAR test, it doesn't always give us the information maybe we'd be looking for, but it does show us where we are relative to other districts around us. That we have for example, the 15th highest EL percentage population in the state for all districts that report it. So only 14 districts have we are 40%. Is what EL's reported. Now, again, some districts may not have entered the data incorrectly. We audited our own data in September, but it's great to look at those other districts around us and that has similar demographics to us and how we can continue to grow, what we can learn from them and them from us. So good information there in that sense. But I just want to take an aside to explain that because that just came out. So to continue to the meat of our presentation in the next slide. This is goal one, our priority one, goal one, which is to improve student growth in English language arts and math. So our goal we set in terms of measurable outcomes is that 100% fall to spring, 100% of our kindergarten through 8th grade students will demonstrate growth within the tiers of instruction as measured by STAR. And so what we mean by that is that they will show positive growth fall to spring. No matter how big or small, they will show that. So I'm actually going to have Mr. Hansen's going to go to slide 22. Not because we're trying to spoil the data, but I want to explain what this is so that when the principals are presenting, you're not wondering, what am I looking at? So what we did is we reported, and we'll want feedback from the board as that this is helpful, is you will recognize the first 3 columns if for those that were here last year, is that we're showing the number of kids in each tier from the fall to spring, it's the same kids. So if I was to take 3rd grade in the spring as 2nd graders, they had 41 of them were there, and in the fall it's 35. So we use numbers for that because if percentages, because some grade levels have very different sizes, a percent, like you could say 10% increase in this grade, but really that's 3 kids. And so we used numbers in that case. On the right side, we made a different decision. We talked about that the board had shared last spring that no matter what tier you're in, we'd like to see how many kids made positive growth, because tier 1 is a huge range, which we'll talk about in a moment. So that number we're going to report on for you is how many kids from fall to spring that took both tests made positive growth. And so we're kind of practicing it this fall. So that means that not to take Kurt's data, but for 3rd grade, for example, all the kids that took it in the spring, because 50% of them that also took in the fall made positive growth from spring to fall, is what that's saying. And we chose percent for that because the numbers can be confusing if you have new enrollments of kids. It's not the same group of kids. So we chose to use percentage for that. So you're going to see numbers on the left. And then that part we chose to report as a percentage, the number of kids that made positive growth as we're looking at. They didn't go backwards, they went forwards. So we can go back then, Mr. Hansen, to the next slide. Thank you. So just wanted to make sure that gives some context to what you'll see. So to go to the next slide, just as a reminder for the board, we have 3 tiers of instruction. The green tier is 30th percentile or above. That's considered tier 1. Tier 2 are students that are in the 29th to 12th percentile. They require additional support, and each school provides that slightly differently. And then tier 3 is those that are 11th percentile or below. They require intensive intervention. And then like we mentioned before, the STAR assessment is given fall, winter, spring, both reading and math. If you remember last year, it was the first time we had tried some of them as a primary level. Now we have some growth measures to compare to. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Berger to explain DLS.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cunningham. Comparison. When we start with the ELA assessments, I just want to remind the board that we have 2 separate categories at the K2 level, one of them being literacy, which is the foundational language skills, including alphabet, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. And then we also have the actual STAR reading, which is the higher application, as students are able to put those foundational skills together and then are able to take it into actual reading of passages and material. So this is where we would include things such as author, literary, argument, higher vocabulary, and higher comprehension in comparison to the early literacy. So when we look at the kindergarten STAR data, these are our brand new diamonds who just started with us this year. They came in only taking the early literacy exam because, of course, that's really what's age appropriate for these students. Some of them we know went through preschool programs or childcare settings. Some of them we know did not. So it gives us a great baseline data for the kindergarten team to look at how much do our children already know about English language and reading skills. So when we took it this fall for early literacy, we had 32 students in tier 1, 9 students in tier 2, and 22 students in tier 3, which was a very appropriate marking across the 3 tiers, because in many cases, it's really, have the children had experience and do they know it? Or maybe they haven't and they don't know it. So we look at it, it's a little bit heavier in tier 1 and tier 3 in comparison to the small number of students that scored within tier 2. But working with the kindergarten team, we are very confident that we will see growth from fall to winter, and then of course also to spring as they are learning more of these skills. And when we come back in the winter, we will have a percentage of growth for you. And then for math with kindergarten, we had 46 in tier 1, 10 in tier 2, and 9 in tier 3. So it's a very strong math foundation for our students who are just joining us as well. And then when we look at first and second grade for the ELA components, we had some students that in the spring still were taking the early literacy, and we had some that were taking the reading. And this was really just dependent on how much growth the child had made throughout the school year and their ability to be able to take either one of the assessments. So when we look at early literacy for first grade, we had 45 in tier 1 for the fall, 24 in tier 2, and 37 in tier 3. And these were children who, of course, last year when they took it were kindergartners. So when we look at growth in combination for this entire grade level, the greatest growth that we're seeing is within that reading star. If we look back at the spring, there were only 6 children that were able to take the reading assessment. This fall, we went much higher with students who were able to perform on that reading assessment compared to just the early literacy. So we had 25 in tier 1, 8 in tier 2, and 16 in tier 3. And when we look at these pieces together in combination, because it covers all of the ELA subject, we had 56% of our children make growth to be able to get into both the reading test and different levels within the early literacy. And then when we look at second grade, we had more students, again, that took the reading in comparison to when they took early literacy the prior spring. So this fall for early literacy, we did not have any students score in tier 1. We had 5 in tier 2 and 19 in tier 3. And then when we look at the reading, 40 in tier 1, 15 in tier 2, and 24 in tier 3 for overall growth of 48% for these students who went from first and are now in second grade. And then for math, we had great growth in first grade, 68 children in tier 1, 14 in tier 2, and 13 in tier 3 for 53% of our children to make growth within the math. And then in second grade, we had a little bit lower growth percentage in comparison, and it was a little bit of regression actually. And we have some different things happening within math with what we have now with our math coach and math interventionist as well. We had 52 students in tier 1, 18 in tier 2, and 23 in tier 3 for 28% of our students overall within second grade, showing growth from the spring to the fall. And then just looking at what the data is telling us, we do have continued growth happening, especially for early literacy and ELA with first and second grade. We do have math, like I said, though, not as much as we'd like to see in second grade. We certainly would like to see a higher percentage there. But one of the great things too is that we're really seeing a strong foundation for kindergarten. So it'll be interesting to see how this grade level performs, because of course they're coming in fresh and we don't have any COVID reasons or anything for this new group. So it'll be great to see the kindergarten team working hard with them and the amount of growth that they can make over the 3 testing cycle. And then things that we're doing to address the gap, we had introduced this last spring and we're continuing with this and making it even stronger. Our building schedule was developed to include specifically phonics and writing, and these times have been added to our ELA block to strengthen those literacy skills. ELA and math coaching opportunities have increased, including our kindergartners in the 3-star testing cycle, so we can keep track of our little ones as well and see their rate of growth. Continuing with our push-in services from interventionists and special education staff. Also, we're doing a lot of consistent progress monitoring and data-driven team meetings. We actually just had our first round of team meetings for the fall, and it was fantastic. All of our teams were really picking apart the data, looking at it on a much deeper level than I think we have in the past. Instead of just looking at some general growth, we were really making decisions about, now that we see the numbers, what does that mean for these kids, but what does it mean for those kids? What might we want to do with these children? So it was great to have those discussions for both ELA and math. And then, of course, continuing with our differentiated what I need time so that we're really able to target those skills with our kids. And math, of course, now being taught in English for our dual language program. First grade, it's been a pretty smooth transition. Second grade, it's being taught in English. Sometimes we're getting answers in Spanish, but if they know how to do it, that's okay. So we're still making that transition, but students have been working really hard, and our dual language teachers have been great with preparing all of their lessons and activities and everything they had previously in Spanish, now to English. And that is DLS. Mr. Prabhu.
Dr. Berger. So the story with our ELA scores at the intermediate school shows some regression and some are slide over the span of your tiers. In third grade, we had 41 students that were in tier 1 in the spring. Fall, that dropped to 35. We were flat in the tier 2, going from 15 to 12, but we increased our tier 3 up to 27 from 22. That being said, 50% of our students are showing positive growth, and I'll circle back to that at the end of this. In fourth grade, we had a slight uptick from 47 to 49 in tier 1. Our tier 2 stayed flat. If you look at tier 3, we had an influx of tier 3 students from 15 to 24. Now, 11 additional students took the test in the fall than did in the spring. Now, does that mean they all went into tier 3? No, but we have more students taking the test this year, so we're looking at where they're actually falling in there. But with that, 43% of our students are making growth, positive growth. In fifth grade, we had a dip in the tier 1, a rise in tier 2, and then another rise in tier 3. So it's a similar trend throughout the 3 grade levels. We'll get into that when we address what we're going to do next. Going over to our math scores, much of the same story here. So we had a little bit of a dip in tier 1 and grade 3. Tier 2 was relatively flat, increasing by 1 student. We did see a reduction in tier 3 from 19 to 15 students. So that's a positive there. In fourth grade, we went up from 44 to 47 in tier 1, stayed flat again in tier 2, but we did have that increase from 11 to 20 in tier 3. Fifth grade, we had a little bit more of a dip in tier 1 from 42 to 33, and an increase in tier 2 from 13 to 17, and also an increase from tier 3 from 26 to 30. But 43% of our students are making positive growth. But what that looks like when you look at it, so in your tiers, when STAR calculates the tiers and where the students are falling, while our students are making positive growth, they're not keeping pace with where they need to be to move throughout the tiers. If that makes sense. So what is it telling us? Other than that, we're not, we can flip to the next slide, Mr. Hanson. So we're going to continue with the instructional focus on mastery of standards. We need to make sure that we're hitting the right things at the right time, so we're exposed to these concepts. And we need to improve student engagement within the assessment process. We need to make sure that when we're taking these assessments, we are really diving into it and committed to it, so we're doing the best we possibly can on there. So what are we going to do to address those learning gaps? Our SIP goals that we wrote for this year focus on literacy and math to address all 3 tiers and what we're going to do within them. We're also reallocating our resources to provide math intervention at all grade levels. I had mentioned this in the spring as well. So we now have a math interventionist that works with all 3 tiers. We didn't have that in the past. We've had the reading interventionist, but not a math interventionist. We now have a math coach that supports all tiers. So similar to what Dr. Berger explained at Diamond Lake is going to happen, it's going to also happen at the intermediate school. And we're increasing our reading instruction with our push-in model and co-teaching support, which we have started, and it's been a very positive experience for everybody involved. So we have multiple teachers teaching reading, differentiating, so we're able to address tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 actually in the classroom. Mr. Peterson.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Preble. Well, we had some very encouraging news from West Oak Middle School and definitely wanted to show you guys. First, that, before I kind of dive into some of the data, what was definitely different, I don't have much context being that I've only been here for 3 years, but what was quite different from this year compared to last year was last year we had 13 kids enroll into our district. This year we are at 26, soon to be 27 new students enrolling into our school as of tomorrow. Actually, we're going to have our 27th come in. So if you guys do the math here, especially with our sixth grade, and really a good chunk of our new enrollees are actually sixth graders. About 2/3 of that 27 ended up being our sixth grade. So the numbers don't jive between spring and fall testing. But nonetheless, so we had some very encouraging results. As you can see here with our star reading results here, it was kind of a rarity that we get into the 50s, especially with that tier one in regards to our tier one number, the amount of kids that test into that tier one level. Sixth grade went up from 50 to 54. Obviously, we're not comparing apples to apples here. We're going to do that a little bit more here as we get into our second benchmark testing in December. But in regards to our tier two, we lost one from 26 to 25, and then our tier three went up from 21 to 28. But in regards to the scaled score, we still had kids that tested, 43% of them still tested higher than they did at last year's time here in the spring. So, it's still good results. Seventh grade here, we held steady at our tier one, and that was a win in itself, being that you always expect that summer slide, and to keep a hold of that number is definitely very encouraging. Lost a couple to tier two, and then we gained a few, gained 4 from 18 to 22 at that tier 3 level. But still, though, over half of our kids showed growth, from last spring to this fall, which is not really what you would expect. Same thing with 8th grade, very encouraging when our tier 1 gained from 41 to 48 kids, our tier 2, 23 to 27. And then what was very encouraging is our tier 3s dropped by 6%, and by 6 kids, which was very good. And then they also hit that 54% range of showing growth between spring and fall tests. All right, at the star math is very similar, and as I mentioned here, when you get into the 50s, number wise, as a class, that didn't happen much here last year. So this was, the kids were very motivated. They took this exam very seriously, and that's something that we're going to continue to drive here as we get into those next two benchmark testing. But 48 to 55 went up seven students. We held steady at that tier 2 with 20 apiece, and we dropped with our tier 3s 27 to 22 kids, but with 43 kids, 43% of that class showing growth. Like I said, though, there's been some movement going on, especially at the 6th grade level. It's kind of hard to compare right now. Same thing with 7th grade. 57 to 56, which is very good. And then our other two numbers here, tier 2 went up 3 from 14 to 17, and our tier 3s held steady. And just to hold steady over the summer months was definitely something that was very encouraging in itself. But with 42% of our students showing growth in that span of time. Last one is 8th grade, 56 to 54, pretty close to where we were at here at the end of the school year last year. Tier 2, we gained 3 from 23 to 26. And then if you look at that last one here, our 8th graders, they did really well. They tried it. They were motivated. And it shows when we see such a large drop with that tier 3 level from 24 to 15. It was corrected.
This one's for FC4 doesn't have the right.
Oh, okay.
I just saw that.
Well, we like to keep.
So
Yeah.
this afternoon, there was an error
Keep
called
paying
the number percentage, and then
Oh, wait, not on the screen.
the screen is.
That one is correct. Yep, that one is correct. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then also with some of these kids, they are, some of them were from different countries where we tested them in English, but also the Spanish version of that test as well. So, if we're testing them in their level of math skill, obviously we're gonna assess them and we're gonna take that score on that Spanish side where they understand what's being said and what they're being tested up during that time too. But yeah, these numbers are correct. Unfortunately, I apologize as the numbers that you guys may have in the board book here may be incorrect. But as I was saying here with seventh grade, held steady from that tier 3 level with that 42% showing growth. Eighth grade, very, very, very strong though. We had a big dip in our tier 3 data where 9 of our kids either moved up or, like I said, as some kids enroll in or transfer out here, there's going to be some change. So definitely looking forward to what kind of data we're going to receive as we get into our winter assessments. But comparatively speaking, with the kids that we had from spring to this fall, over half of them, 55% showed growth. And I would assume here, with reading, there may be kids reading throughout the months. I don't know how many kids are doing math problems throughout those summer months, but just to show that growth here, it was very encouraging, and there was a lot of positives to be taken from this data. If you move on to the next one. So what is this data telling us? Obviously some very good growth that we are seeing here with our STAR testing, both in literacy and math. And students have shown a lot of growth here in their higher order thinking skills as well. And that's typically something that comes along last, are those higher order thinking skills. And but they are definitely showing that when we start looking at the sub skills within the overall skills in those two tests. What we're doing, we are, I know me and Dr. Cunningham have been doing this for 3 years together now. And, now we're starting to gain some consistency. And this is our second year of our LLI program where our interventionists have been implementing that readers and writers workshop. So kids are seeing the same thing. Teachers becoming more comfortable with what they're teaching as well. This was brand new to them last year. And, now that, year 2, as with anything, the first year is always a feeling out. The second year, I feel like they've kind of hit the ground running here with this. So, we're looking to see, that movement between tier 3 to tier 2 and then hopefully tier 2 to tier 1. Same thing with that tier 1 math, we're going to continue at our current pacing. Tier 2 and tier 3 reading, like I mentioned here with our leveled literacy text used to reinforce our interventions. Our tier 2 math, we are pulling kids out during their advisories with their core math teachers at each grade level to offer that additional support there. Tier 3 math is we have dedicated resource classes as that continues, that consistency there with VMath and Miss Rogers. Our ELL students, same thing. This is something new to them last year, and we're continuing with that LLI program at that level as well, and with that group of students. And then finally, we're adding STAR progress monitoring, and also we're evaluating kids based upon their STAR results here with our special ed population. And we have realized that we say cross-curricular. We realize that writing and reading isn't just the ELA's or the reading interventionist problem. It's a whole building. It's a whole building effort here that we're trying to bring all of our kids up. So cross-curricular work is happening. It's something that our instructional coaches have been working on with our teachers, and it takes a certain level of comfort to if I'm doing art, well, how can I incorporate reading and writing in there? Same thing with science. We have our science teachers incorporating reading and writing, science related books within their curriculum as well. So we're working on increasing that cross-curricular study here throughout the year as well. And now I'm going to turn over to Dr. Cunningham.
Mr. Peterson, one other thing that the board had asked for in the past was to see a breakdown of our tier 1 students, because that range is so big, 30 to 99th. We wanted to provide that for the board. So this is out of EduClimber, and in order to get this completely the same as our tier, it'll take some work with EduClimber. So just full disclosure, this is showing you the 25th to 99th not the 30th. So that first section, it's kind of all, they're all trying to be shades of greens, that blue got a little crazy. But that shade of green at the bottom would be the 25th to 49th. So we would cut off some of that section would be our 25th to 29th percentile, just so we're clear on that. But so you can kind of see our, in general, once you cut that group out, really our biggest group of students is in the 50th to 74th. And then we start placing kids in accelerated and honors toward the late intermediate into middle school level, based on some of their score measures and kind of those darker shades of colors into the blue. But this just to give you a general idea of what's happening in the tier 1 breakdown. The percentages that are inside of that are showing out of all tier 1 or out of the whole group of students, what percentage is that? So if you were to add these up, they don't add to 100 because they're also counting in what's in the 10th to 24th percentile and 0 to 9th. Those are EduClimbers picks for how we do that, not ours, which is why we have some of the 25th lumped in there. So the next slide is just showing math as well. Same idea, it's showing the 25th, but you can see this is kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. The other one is showing you first grade through 8th grade because of the early literacy is what's used for STAR in kindergarten. EduClimber does not run that same report. So this one adds kindergarten in to show where, again, the tier breakdown is for math. You can see, for example, first grade has this huge chunk of that 75th to 89th percentile in tier 1. So sometimes these things can tell us stories beyond what you might see in the 3 colored tiers. So we welcome feedback from the board if that is an effective way of demonstrating that. To continue on, just to show district-wide what we are working on, some of the initiatives and supports that have gone into place, whether it was this year or last year. Our after-school programming does continue K through 5 for additional math and reading support for tier 2 students, and each of them have worked to expand that offering as logistics allows for all of our students. So they continue with Imagine Learning this year, and teachers have worked actually to supplement a lot of that. And then 6th through 8 continues their tutorial program. We have developed our standards-based rubric. They're going to go into effect next week. Standards-based report card, excuse me. So K5 is in place for literacy and math. And we are working this year in K5. They will have their social studies, science, Spanish language arts, which is the dual language, as well as specials. All of those are going to be converted over to standards based this year so that the report card will be entirely standards based at elementary next year. We did create also on our website, we have a page that's going to house an explanation of all of the grades because we are in transition time between both sets of scores. We have adopted Francis and Pinnell and LLI, which is the intervention for K5 and 6-8 reading. And we are currently selecting new writing curriculum for K5, and we are selecting new math curriculum for K8 because they are out of print. So we have a few really good choices, and we're very thankful for our instructional coach to help us with that. So in the instructional coaching side, which has been a huge priority, it's been a phenomenally successful year so far using our coaches. They are working on implementing the balanced literacy framework. That's K through 8. Curriculum and assessment design, they're supporting data analysis and PLCs, general instructional practice. We're using the art and science of teaching, that book to guide us this year. Instructional technology work, including bringing the digital student target portfolio initiative that was started a number of years ago before COVID to bring that back. And the middle school will be kind of the first school to really work on that for this year for spring conferences. And then we're seeing a lot of cooperative learning support, especially as we're pushing in our interventionists. And then just in terms of data-driven decision-making, EduClimber is becoming more robust. Mr. Hansen has been working with the instructional technology team to get a lot of different measures in there so they can see their F&P scores. We can see access scores. We can see a lot of progress monitoring data all there. Each of the schools has a really nice plan for how they use PLCs, where they rotate a reading day, a math day, different data reviews and student support days. That data management has been facilitated largely by the coaches and team leads and the principals. It's gone incredibly well. They've been able to make decisions and see results within 2 to 4 weeks at all grade levels. We're progress monitoring our students using some new tools. Renaissance has a curriculum-based measure we're using, for example. And then we are providing additional supports, unique supports in reading and math. MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And what we're doing as a committee is we're making sure that K through 8, we have a clear pathway for how kids receive supports in all those 3 colors, tier 1, 2, and 3. And that is in the areas of reading, math, social, emotional learning, and then eventually we'll expand, and that includes behavior, and eventually we'll expand that to attendance as well. And then we have our student SEL surveys we just finished giving, and we're compiling that data right now. And then our DESA screener where teachers are screening students. And then we have a curriculum that the SEL team works very hard on, as well as Second Step we provide. So those are just an update on some of the initiatives we are working on at the district level. And with that, we turn it over for any questions.
Can you hear me with this? I'm really familiar with like almost all of these acronyms and programs that you have in place. I see them every day. I'm really, really impressed with all of this that I see in place. I know my kids are in great hands. I'm really proud of all this. I had one question. Do you ever dissect the information, the data between dual and not dual language students?
Yes.
I'm like,
Not-
who wants to answer?
No, we absolutely do. And what's been interesting this year, what we're looking at is how now that we're switching dual back over to English math, how that's going to help or not, because math intervention was very difficult to provide in the past because the interventionist was not bilingual. So now we can provide math intervention in English. So yes, if the board would like to see that, we would just try to put that together in a communication or in a future meeting.
Is math now being taught in English because of a personnel issue?
Well, you might be onto something there. So essentially, we kind of talked a little bit in June about it. It was really fun to have that be the first thing I share out on. But essentially, we at the K3 level, we love the idea of doing it, and we'd love to explore going back to that. And any resource we purchase in math will be completely workable in both languages. At the K1 and 3 level, we were unable to sustain that model while putting high quality teachers in front of kids. And so we elected to go to that for the 50-50 for this year.
It's do their math in Spanish still. I can hear them when they're talking to themselves. And I'm really sorry to hear that. Is that conveyed to the dual language parents?
We communicated what was going to be happening in terms of where we were going moving forward, and then it's in our programming guide as well. So it switches over in 3rd grade, it goes to 60-40. Now it's just in 3rd grade, it goes to 50-50. The biggest change is that math went to Spanish and then everything else stayed. Or sorry, yes, math went to English and then all of their Spanish literacy time stayed where it was.
And personally, I don't know if this needs to be board data given to the board, but I would love to know how the dual kids do versus the non-dual kids. Just out of curiosity.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
A couple questions. I'm going to piggyback on what David asked about and just ask, in looking at those like numbers from Diamond Lake, and I don't know, Peter or Dr. Berger, if this is which one of you this is a better question for, but you know, the math numbers look like the students have a bunch of room to grow. Do they need additional support in Spanish? Like, is there are the students, you know, you said some of them are answering in Spanish. Do they need additional like push and support in Spanish to support kind of their math learning? Or is the transition working, like, are you expecting that to just kind of work itself?
Work itself out. It's a matter of making that transition specifically for 2nd grade, because they had gone through 2 years of math in Spanish. We do have our Spanish interventionist, Lizzie Duffy. She helps mostly with ELA. However, if the student also needs help with math, she will also help with math in some way. And then math interventionist also helps with math to try and help make that transition back to English. So there are supports and services that are being provided. I truly just feel like it's a matter of time
Okay,
because they've been used to having it in
Sure.
Spanish.
okay. I had a couple other questions. for you. With the new curriculum that you're looking at for writing and for math, when do you anticipate that to be implemented?
The writing curriculum we've just piloted, the middle school level is going to be generally using Lucy Calkins and their rubrics for that. That's kind of already essentially done and they're writing they're finishing their unit plan so they can eventually look at standards-based grading as well. K5 just finished piloting or they're finishing piloting F&P writing, and that's been extremely well received. Our kids have built a lot of really good writing endurance, and it is still we call a writer's workshop model, which is a very it's a great way to do groupings and to provide a lot of good feedback to students real time. And so we presented it to the leadership team in October. We're going to present it to the full staff in November, K5 that is, and provided without any hiccups, we will likely adopt that and begin. They'll be adopted for sure for next year if we're with any red flags, but we want to start using it this spring
Okay,
to make that transition. That would be a K3 because the 4-5 curriculum is still being finalized for F&P, but the staff have really liked it and have found it to be a huge benefit and improvement of what they are used to with students, and kids are excited to write. I know at the middle school level, for example, those in communication arts, they put out 16 separate pieces of writing last year, and that's been a very effective piece to see them grow. The math curriculum would go into effect for next year. Essentially, Dr. Jaraka, may he rest in peace, as we say here, he extended our math curriculum one more year, but it's out of print.
Okay.
And so it has to go into effect next year.
okay,
So there's basically a choice between mastery based, where you teach a concept, move on to the next unit, or what's called spiraled, which is you teach part of a concept and come back to it later. And so we've exposed our leadership team to all three. And this is where it's nice to have Vicki Riley again as a math coach to support. And then we know what our feeders around us do and what they use. And so actually Mr. Preble is going to go with Ms. Riley to go visit one of the schools. And then we were invited, District 103 and 96 also invited our teachers to go see what they're doing. So we're trying to make as educated a decision as we can, knowing that we have to put something in place and we want to start using that release time staff is given this spring to begin to learn that resource.
okay, great, thank you. I have 2 more quick questions. First, did we track how our summer school students did?
I actually have some notes here. So out of our summer school kids, and I can speak to the intermediate school. But basically our summer school kids that attended, and attendance plays a big part of this. I don't have that piece to it yet, but in reading in math, 45% of our students made positive growth that attended summer school. In reading, 47% of our students made positive growth. But the interesting thing is, out of all the students that attended summer school and for the intermediate side, is 69% of them made growth in one or the other. So we had students that obviously made growth in math, made growth in reading, but when you put who made growth all together, 70% of our attending students made growth in something. So that was encouraging.
That's great, thank you. And then my last question is, so I was looking at the chronic absenteeism, and it looks like that percentage has doubled for our district in the last 3 years. And I would assume that that impacts obviously student growth and how the students do. Do we have any data on why that's occurred? I would also assume that COVID has played a factor with that. But I just was wondering if we have more data on why that's occurred, if there's anything else we are doing to kind of address that, and if there's a way to kind of make up some of that kind of achievement gap with those students.
Yeah, well, it is very high. And initially we were very concerned just on the side in our own right because of how high it was, because we saw the new score measures that were coming out, but it turns out we were doing better in attendance than the state was.
Yeah, I did see that.
So a lot of it, a significant part is COVID because it's 18 days you're out and 180 days you're chronic. So we were quarantining 10 days up until about halfway through the year. And so that was 10 days already. We also noticed during the pandemic and a little bit after, some families were more willing to, I have to be careful how I phrase this. They were taking trips and missing some time as well, if that makes sense. So We have met already as a leadership team and as an admin associates team to go over an understanding of how we need to approach chronic absenteeism and truancy communication to families, but with what we first need to document. And then due to provide intervention. So the MTSS manual, we will create the absentee policy of what we'll pursue. But we're trying to, at this point in the year, it's toward the end of first trimester, a lot of the interventions that we have, things that maybe we would not have done before because of COVID, we're making contacts and conferencing with families again to problem solve anybody that's at, we kind of have these markers, 5 days, we need to talk to you about this, 7 days, we're going to talk to you about this way. We're gonna have a conference here, but it's always supportive because families have circumstances and we're not a punitive model is not effective for basically we're just trying to get our 27 or whatever it is, 28.5% chronic absenteeism rate back down to about 7 to 8%. And we should see a dramatic decrease this year. And then we can really help these 7 to 8% of our families to back to where we were before. Hopefully that answers that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you all for the data. I think this was very informative, but I'll let my.
Oh, sure. I just have one question just about the data in the middle school. Because obviously all of this tracking is the purpose is obviously to make sure everybody's growing so that their journey beyond Diamond Lake is successful. So my question is it possible to get any information, not necessarily for this, but just in the future, for how our rising freshmen, our 8th graders moving on, how they are doing at Mundelein, at Stevenson, based on what we're seeing in their 8th grade year as a group, how they are adapting to the high school, their placements, are they in line with their peers from other surrounding neighboring districts? And you probably have some of that. I know it isn't necessarily related to these particular pieces of data, but just sort of in the future, just to kind of make sure that all these things that we're putting in place are getting our students, able, ready to be in those higher level classes, to be successful in high school and beyond, just to kind of compare, where they as a group start, how they show growth and what that growth produces as far as their placements when they move on beyond the walls of the middle school here. So
that's always a hot topic with our eighth grade teachers. And that's something that they've really embraced, the CER method towards writing its claim, evidence, and reasoning. We have times where we articulate with the freshmen, the high schools on both Stevenson and Mundelein. But yeah, I think we'd be curious too here to, and that's what our overall goal is, to prepare them for the next level. Same thing throughout our district. DLS wants to prepare them for intermediate wants to prepare them for us, and we want to make sure kids are as prepared as possible going to whatever high school it is. But and that's something that we have definitely discussed, and we are still continuing to discuss as well with the other schools that they feed into. So I would like to see that as well. So that's a good request, and I'll look into that.
I'll jump on that just briefly. My apologies, Mr. Peterson. Stevenson will provide it if we ask. And I think the only department that provides it unsolicited is math. So Brandon will get a chance at some point. They'll email him and say, let's sit down and look at all your kids. They have like a data warehouse person that will run it, if that makes sense. Mundelein has been notoriously much more difficult to get that information from, if that makes sense. Doesn't mean it's not worth continuing that path and conversation and trying to secure that information.
You know what I mean? After this fall, so they'll probably do it closer to January. So I know that all of us, the middle school, as well as Dr. Cunningham and myself, all meet with the Mundelein as well as the Stevenson cohorts for our job alike program. And we can definitely continue to push for that.
Obviously, right
Mhm.
now, but just sort of one, or dance reading, or sure that all these things are doing
You know, what's interesting about Stevenson is we meet with them and we place students based upon where we feel like they can be successful at, where they're going to be challenged still. And what's interesting about Stevenson is you know, they, regardless, let's say we place them in geometry and they feel like they can take a harder class, or they can take a, you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to pull back a little bit, I want to take this instead. It is completely up to the individual students and families on where they want to place themselves as well. And they did present that data to us, and I'd be happy to share it with you, you know, as compared to the other feeder schools to Stevenson.
Mr. Becker.
Ooh, two further questions. A district I know very well allows the students who are quarantined to attend on Zoom with no screen on, and it counts as an attendance day for that student. Has this district ever thought about that? It's a lot more work for the classroom teacher, I know that, but it counts as an attendance day and the student is able to listen in throughout the day, and it's one less absent for that student that day.
Yeah, I mean, without discussing it, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we're not necessarily under quarantine orders anymore currently, but we would, if we could secure that, yes, we're not marking them absent, because now how chronic absenteeism is reported, we would not want to do that, one, and then two, absolutely, if we can capture that, we would not want to count it against them.
There's a lot of pieces involved. The student has to have technology and has to have Wi-Fi. There has to be a Zoom link for the teacher and the student to connect, but it just allows for the student to participate throughout the day with camera off, microphone off, but at least the student's hearing what's happening. They can connect on a Seesaw with the instructions that are given, or Google Classroom. Just a thought. And then my other question is, as you're looking at math programs like Bridges and Vision, are you looking to programs that have a strong Spanish support in hopes that the personnel will be reinstated for math, and the math is taught again in Spanish?
Yeah, the three we've narrowed down to all have a strong Spanish component. So we have that ability, that option, should we want to go there? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, and just to come back to the first question, probably one of the number one questions districts have for the state is, if you're talking about chronic absenteeism, but we have to quarantine and we have different levels of when you're at home, if you can get on or you can't, or there's a lot of things going on. How are schools supposed to code that so that they're not penalized under the new system? So, and that hasn't been necessarily answered clearly. To your point, where not every family has maybe
Right.
the access they need or the
But having
supervision.
camera off, microphone off, it doesn't matter if they're in bed,
Right.
if they're not feeling well, but they still want to listen and participate just by listening at least. It was just a thought.
Yeah,
I know
no,
a
but
district that
it's,
does that.
it just brings up that whole line of questioning. So thank you.
Do you think too that because like the quarantine guidelines changed so frequently during COVID, and because if that's factoring into chronic absenteeism, that districts might have all been reporting it out differently, and so there's not really a consistent metric either to look across the state as to, you know, what's really going on?
You know, what happened with what we did, like when we looked at it, we looked at what our numbers were and we ran how we coded it. We just double checked it. And we're like, this is what everything we have here is accurate. A lot of schools really panicked when they saw they were asked to check it earlier and they didn't. And so a lot of them got very concerned it and wanted the state to tell them how to do. This is all back, you know, what am I supposed to do with this from a year ago now that you're releasing this? And so yes, it was all reported differently. People don't use the same codes in PowerSchool, even though most of us use like one of 3 different systems. You can add different letters in. Every district does it differently. And then they report that differently to the state.
Hi, thanks very much. I just had one clarifying question and then one other question. I really like the breakout of the tier 1, because that answers, that gets right to the heart of a question that we had before when we last looked at the data. Very helpful. There's some data on the stacked bars on the far right. It's like a scale. Is there something that we need to be aware of, or is it just?
That's their total score that they could have gotten.
Okay, so it's like Okay,
So the left is the number of kids.
right.
But they
right.
give you a percent, which is a little confusing. If you remember, for those that remember, Dr. Draka, may he rest in peace, when he put those lines on top of the bars, I don't know if you remember that, that was a really fun day. So if I was to put those lines back, you can see they're not selected at the bottom of those pictures of that data. If I was to put those lines back, it'll show you then the lines connecting to these numbers on the right. So it's also going to give you, it's like two graphs on top of
Okay,
each other. We just
okay.
took away the second graph, but left the part on the right. When I screenshotted, I could have just cut that off and then you wouldn't have to ask me that, but I did. I
Okay,
kept it on
no,
there.
all good, all good. My second question is very helpful to see the percentage of students that grew. Very interesting. I'm not in education, what's a good target for that? What should we be striving for?
Yeah, well, we
Okay.
wrote it as 100 because we just set it as positive growth.
Right,
So we don't feel that's unrealistic. I mean, and this is growth based on just summer to fall. So we believe we should get close to that. Because
when
we
you
got,
say when we go from fall to spring.
yes, so we think every kid can grow at least one on that side, the other side, the up to 1600. If they had an 800, we think they can get at least an 801 by
Right,
the spring. What we got rid of was what we did last year, which is that student growth percentile. It's a little more complicated. And so it kind of got lost, the meaning got lost. That's another way you can frame it, which is how many kids beat the same amount of kids at their score that started across the nation. So we went to this way instead after feedback from the board, just to be
Mhm.
able to show we're just going to show you, we want every kid to move and we're
Right.
going to celebrate that.
and so when we're looking at these data here that show 50% or 42 or 55, that's between the end of last year and the beginning of this year? So it's just what would be what would be typical of?
Jeez, yeah, I knew that was coming. I don't know.
Okay.
To be honest, I think this is what we're going to consider typical right now.
All right,
From spring to fall is this like
Sure.
50th percentile. I think the good question is, how does summer school benefit? And what can we do to our summer school? Mr. Preble put out that survey recently to try to think about it. How is that helping and how many kids can we get involved? And that would be interested as we continue to work on it. If it affects that number really is almost like a summer school and summer learning referendum. And beyond it, it was really just a practice for us to show you guys as a board, does this make sense?
no, very fair. Thank you.
Numbers look really good considering we all know what the summer slide is.
Yeah.
And we know the scores typically go down throughout all economic levels and gender and grade levels. So I think that's a great start. I look forward to seeing what the fall to winter upscale will look like.
All right. Thank you.
A real quick question. So the EduClimber, that is appealing to me. Like I can see it better than like just seeing the numbers, kind of trying to figure out the change from spring till fall. Is there any way that we can see like all of the tiers, like maybe do like smaller groups, but like all of the tiers and then again in the spring and
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's the easiest. What's already, Mr. Hansen and his team done a great job of pre-setting it. So as soon as we open it, that's exactly what we see.
Okay, yeah,
So-
that would help me understand the data better.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think to Nicole's point, it would be very interesting to see how many kids are kind of on the cusp between the two, like that might be very telling. Other questions? I can't see the whole length of the table. That's why I'm asking. So I don't want to like interrupt anybody. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, again, thank you. This was very helpful. I think the tier 1 data is very much what we were looking for, and that gives us more insight. And we appreciate the time everyone spent on this and the time you all spent answering our questions and kind of giving us further explanation. I think it's a very good baseline for us to have going into the rest of the year.
And if I could just add a comment, and I just kind of shared this with Joy on the side. One of the things that's been really beneficial that we've seen this past year is that teachers are able to actually use the data with EduClimber. And principals have carved out, as you saw in our goals and priorities, an actual time of those grade level meetings to sit down and look at the data. And then that is what the whole meeting is focused on. So every teacher comes prepared with their classroom data, or the students, if they're interventionists, the students that they work with, and they're able to monitor that growth immediately and consistently. And I think it's going to get even stronger as we get into the winter and we have more data pieces and kids and they have more support. So I was just very impressed, and I shared that today at PAC too, that I attended all the data meetings in October and was really inspired by how well the teachers have gotten to use it in the first couple of months and how well they know their students.
That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, that wraps up our presentations. We're going to move on to our business agenda. We have 1 item for action and 2 items for review. So the omnibus vote agenda is there for review. We have a personnel item that's up for action. Be it resolved, the Diamond Lake 76 Board of Education accepts and approves the personnel items as depicted on the agenda. We have 1 new hire and we have 3 leaves of absence. May I have a motion to approve?
Second.
Mr. Capella?
Yes.
Ms. Angarola? Yes. Ms. Bailiff? Yes. Ms. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Sullivan?
That motion is approved. Moving on to the district vehicle purchase. Mr. Rogers, I didn't know if you wanted to razzle dazzle us with your plow truck proposal.
Nothing more razzle dazzling than a plow truck proposal. I should have just put a big picture of what we currently have. And there would have been
Self-explanatory.
no memo that was, yeah, our vehicle's pretty old that we have right now. And in order to drive it straight, we had a 175-degree angle. So
That was real safe.
it is, yeah, so currently our Nick Galeotto, one of our maintenance technicians, is using his own personal vehicle. It's not a good practice to have. So this is unfortunately, we were able to get a vehicle, so price was a lot lower. This is still the lowest possible price. We are able to use a state purchasing co-op, get a pre-bid vehicle. So it costs $52,870. We're able to get a plow on it as well, and we were able to be recouping maybe $1,000 from the current vehicle.
And we will vote on that at our next meeting. And that concludes the business agenda. So moving on to board discussion, we have the resolutions committee report to go through again really quickly for the most part. And just kind of annotate what our board's positions are going to be. Just to quickly review, at the delegate assembly meeting, and Nikki, I'm going to give you this packet when we leave so that you have all the information, because it gives you kind of some background information too. But they essentially, Nicole as our delegate will vote on the IASB constitutional amendments. She will vote on the resolutions and then also on the position statements. We briefly, I think, kind of glossed over the constitutional amendments, although, you know, for the most part, they're not significant. Other than I think in a way, they're actually making things a little bit easier or more straightforward. I didn't know if people wanted to have additional discussion on that, or if we just felt that the board would support those.
And if you look in your second attachment, it's the summary page, because I know sometimes in that large document, because you have it electronically, it's just hard because only Joy and I got the paper copies of it. So we just summarized all of that for you in the second attachment.
So it looked like by the nodding of heads, everyone agrees with supporting the constitutional amendments. Am I reading that right? Trying to look down the rest of the table. Yes. Okay. So then that we support. For the resolutions, I believe that I have annotated here that we supported all of them, except for number 7 seemed to be the one that we still had discussion on. Does that sound correct? Or are there any that people would prefer to discuss beyond number 7? Okay, I'm gonna take silence as you're agreeing with what I'm saying. So do you want to take a look at number 7? I know that, I believe in our last discussion, there just was some lack of clarity around what would actually occur in terms of a mandate review committee, how the committee would be created, like how the logistics of that would work. And it seemed like from the proposal that the logistics of it would actually be figured out by the legislation or once the committee was created. And so that wasn't really the focus of the proposal. Does anyone have or want to advocate their position for or against supporting that resolution? Okay, hopefully too, on there's going to be a delegate assembly webinar on November 3rd. And if you're able to attend that, Nicole, they might, at least in the past, they've given additional reasoning or had additional discussion as to the background or the intent. And so when I attended in the past, it gave me more insight than was in the booklet, and that might happen. So, okay, great. And then the last thing was the position statements. They basically made deletions or amendments. The vast majority of them seem to be changes solely because the law has changed. And so that they were updated to reflect the current positioning of the law or the various committees. Like e-learning was, it seems to be really more of a cleanup than anything else. I don't know if anyone felt differently or wanted to discuss anything specific. No, I would be in favor of supporting the changes. Does anyone feel differently? Okay, then I'm going to say we support them. Again, Nicole, I'll give you this after the meeting concludes tonight. Thank you very much for agreeing to be our delegate. That's really an important job, and I think it's an interesting experience too. So we really appreciate the time that you're going to spend there. Okay, the only other thing I had for board discussion is just to give you an update on that diversity, equity, and inclusion training that we keep trying to schedule. I have not heard back from IASB, but I did request the January 12th date from them. Because I believe we could start at like 6 o'clock that night. I know that she had told me it would be like a 2 to 3 hour training. I need to confirm that, but I haven't heard back from her. As soon as I hear back, I will let you all know. But that's tentatively when I would kind of put a placeholder in the calendar. Okay, moving on to freedom of information requests, we had none. Notices and communications.
We have one communication. It is from a staff member who is sharing her appreciation for recognition of a private event that happened in her family. So she thanks the board and the district leadership team for recognizing that. And then also I will be presenting at the joint annual conference, and I put that information in there for your review.
Thank you. Great. Then we will move on to public comments and petition.
I'm sorry.
Go
one
ahead.
more. I apologize. I just put the CEDAL governing board meeting, which is going to be on December 7th. And I
Oh, yeah.
believe Mr. Houtman said he'll be attending.
Great. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. So then moving on to public comments and petitions on non-agenda items. Do we have any public comments or petitions? If you're joining us virtually, we'd be happy to take your public comments and read those into the meeting. If you choose to add them to the chat box. We'll pause again to give you the opportunity to do that. Okay, it does not look like we have any public comments. Under others, I just wanted to quickly, on behalf of the board, thank everyone for their participation in the planning of and successful execution of the Dia de los Muertos event, especially Daisy and Marina and the BPAC and all of the teachers and staff and students we had there supporting. It was really nice to see that event come back. There was an amazing turnout. There were so many families there. So I just wanted to take a second and recognize them publicly and thank them. It was really well done. And it's always great when we're able to see our community come together. And especially after COVID, to see so many families, especially so many new faces and new families. It was a fantastic event. So I just wanted to thank them. Does anyone have any others? Okay, then we do not have executive session this evening, so could we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Yes. Great, thank you so